You can do good in any organization. It doesn't matter if it's a company, a private sector, government, non-governmental, or an activist organization, or your family. I mean, doing good, I think, is what most people want to do. And you just need to make sure that you are very conscious and strategic about it. So any organization can do good, even businesses, and especially businesses.
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. This episode is powered by J Ventures, a community-driven VC fund in Silicon Valley in partnership with Leumi Tech, sponsored by Homeward Ventures, Hippo Insurance, Upwest Labs, Synergy Global, Hillel at Stanford, Leap, Birthright Excel, Serona Partners, and in media partnership with C-Tech. Hello and welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Today we're talking about impact and sustainability with Amalia Adler, the Vice President and Global Head of Environment, Social and Governance, ESG at Teva Pharmaceuticals. Amalia is a seasoned global leader in ESG, healthcare strategy, and communications. She is a strategic planner, executor, and a visionary manager who effectively drives organizational change aligned with business strategy. Amalia established and leads a global health and environment social governance ESG unit in Teva Pharmaceuticals in Tel Aviv, Israel, and has recently led the issuance of Teva's $5 billion ESG Sustainability Linked Bond, the largest such bond ever. Amalia Adler-Waxman, welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. This is going to be so much fun. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you, Michael? It's such a pleasure to be here.
I'm really honored to have you here, Amalia, because your job really is to do good for the world. And you've been working in such incredible organizations, and we'll go over them very shortly. But what the tying knot, I think, throughout your career, and the tying pattern, is the fact that everywhere you went, you've been helping the organizations that you're at to do better and to be more conscious about what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how to then both share it with the world, but also share it internally and figure out how to do it properly. Today, we talk all the time about ESGs and about impact, but you've been at it for much longer than what we're just hearing today in the news. So Amalia, share with me a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your experiences. And then I'd love to hear how you see the world of ESGs and sustainability and impact sort of make its way, since you've started working on it.
Sure. It's so nice to, recall and go back to where it all started personally. And I think for many organizations. So I'm from Jerusalem originally. I now live in Tel Aviv. I have two daughters. They're big now, and they work and they study, and they're my greatest pride. And I think that, and I've lived, I've been around and about quite a bit in the world, and I think it's important to mention that my career spanned 3 continents. I've worked in Israel. I've worked in Canada, in Geneva, in Switzerland, in New York, then again in the Geneva Lake area in Switzerland. So I think that a lot of what I've done was really defined by the places and opportunities I was able to capture during those moves. And the moves were not something that I planned. It wasn't something that I woke up in the morning and said, oh, I'm going to conquer the world and I'm going to have an international career. I was just, I was lucky to have opportunities due to some family circumstances, was married to an Israeli diplomat, and that kind of brought me very close to organizations who allowed me to help the world, them do good for the world.
And then just to name a few, the World Health Organization, the Weizmann Institute, Pfizer, Nestle, Teva Pharmaceuticals, today actively the vice president. And I love that they have a vice president of the ESG, of environment, social and governance. That's incredible.
Yes, it's incredible. I think not just that I'm vice president of ESG. I think it's incredible because it's a real recognition and realization that ESG, environment, social governance, or I call it in two different ways. One is non-financial performance, which is kind of more dry way of talking to this, or the how, that are so integral and strategic to the company in addition to the what and to the financial performance. So I think this is an involvement that you would see around the world, but it's also very real where I see it and within Teva. It's really coming directly and straight from the CEO.
Incredible. Incredible. Take me back a little bit
Yes,
to...
I'll take you back. And the one thing that I want to start with is that just to say that, you can do good in any organization. It doesn't matter if it's a company, a private sector, government, non-governmental, or an activist organization, or your family. I mean, doing good, I think, is what most people want to do. And you just need to make sure that you are very conscious and strategic about it. So any organization can do good, even businesses, and especially businesses. And I'll take you back, not a whole lot, but well, it may sound like many years ago. It's about 22 years ago. To me, it seems like yesterday, and globally, it's not that long ago. I happened to come to Switzerland, and I found a job at the World Health Organization. And during those days, it was very interesting. I was basically looking for an interesting job, and where I landed was in a department or a section at WHO that was dealing with non-communicable diseases. I didn't know anything about health. I didn't know what non-communicable disease was. But what I did observe very early in the days is that the whole UN system at the time started to look into social responsibility without even understanding that this is the push that the UN had been given to companies. And the story goes that I came to look into private-public partnerships with the private sector, and WHO was not overly friendly or collaborative with the private sector. And at the heart of it was, how can we influence companies who are doing things that impact the health of people to be more responsible in the way they do it without even saying CSR? And it was very interesting that exactly at that time, the Secretary General of the UN was Kofi Annan, and he decided to create something that was called the Global Compact. He really wanted to bring companies closer to the agenda of the UN. And from this, actually, what evolved was a set of criteria of what it means to be a good company. Second, what are the things that are most important for the world? This is how the Millennial Development Goals evolved. Today, we know them as the Sustainable Development Goals. It all started around 1999 or 2000, exactly when I came to WHO. So
Wow.
I did not plan a career in ESG. I was doing something different.
Yeah.
But what I was doing was exactly that.
Wow. So you're sitting there. Continue, please.
So basically what we were trying to do, we were trying to see how we can work with pharmaceuticals and food companies to look into what they do and make sure that they are well aware of their health challenges and they address them. And there were some, ups and downs to this kind of conversation and issues. Those were the days where the first HIV medicines came, to the world. They were very expensive. There were activist demonstrations. I don't know, some people who lived at that time would remember there were the Seattle demonstration. People really fought for making medicines accessible for HIV to poor people, especially in Africa, where it was a real devastating pandemic, talking about pandemics. And this was a big shift in how companies, now I'm at a pharmaceutical company. In between, I was in a food company, so it's interesting, how things in life can circle back to where sometimes you started all. And this really created a shift in the understanding of companies that what they do has sometimes positive, sometimes negative impact on society and on the environment. And there was, I think, the direction of travel has really led to where we are today globally with ESG. And somehow my career was, just I happened to be on that path.
Incredible. So at what point do you observe in these 20-year span, do you see an inflection point? Is it when the United Nations articulated that as part of a program, or is the millennial goals? Were there different triggers that made you feel that the world is shifting more towards the sustainability and the development goals in a really practical way in the private market?
Yeah, I think, at least from my experience, and maybe this is where I was, maybe things happened before, but my observation is that yes, this was a tipping point. By the way, it's interesting. I think around that time, the book Tipping Point just came out. So I think it indeed was a tipping point from a global perspective, looking into environmental and social issues as critical. And in many ways, I believe that over the years, different crises, unfortunately, led to, a step up. There is a spiral, and sometimes, the spiral goes down and then up, it has those jumps. So I think, if we look back at the last 20 years, normally there was a step up after some kind of a crisis, whether it's a social crisis like the 2008, financial crisis, which has led to quite a lot of structural changes, including, in the US. Sometimes it's the spill, of oil that suddenly, created more attention for the environment. I think that COVID-19, if I think about all of those incidents, they may have been very impactful on a sector or an area. I think COVID-19 was really a critical turning point, because I think COVID-19 converged with a few things. First of all, it was the pandemic. It was access to care, access to health, that everybody now recognizes how important it is. I think it's the whole shutdown of the world, what happens to people, to employment, to how it impacts poverty. I think it how families are coping with it, what companies are doing to support their employees, to maintain the supply. It's not just a health crisis. It's a pandemic that amplified almost every aspect of life. And we have to remember, during COVID, there were quite scary environmental issues, crises, terrible flames in California, drought in California. I'm just talking about things that might be closer to some of the audiences, but there were also, equally devastating cases in other parts of the world. There was the bushfire, in flames in Australia, which was horrible. There were floods in Germany. So there were the environmental issues suddenly became very pronounced. Not only that, everybody talked about how COVID and many other pandemics, emanated from animals and so the environmental issues came up. And then when all of this is happening, we all observed George Floyd case, crisis in North America. And suddenly, the whole issue of inclusion and equity, and equity crosses COVID, crosses environment. So I think something in 2020, between COVID, George Floyd, this triangle, and the environment converged. And on the background of a lot of work that already happened, of investors already talking about ESG, already looking at ESG as a risk management opportunity, I think it actually made ESG, one would think, well, all companies would care is about just continuity of business. But actually, it became very personal. And when things are personal, we have a broader understanding of the society, and we are also motivated to act.
Right. What do you do today, Amalia? What does the vice president of ESG at Teva do?
So what we do in ESG is, first of all, we work across the whole organization. And ESG is not just something that I do or my team. It's actually something that's happening everywhere in the company. So what is our value? What we basically do is that we help the company understand what is ESG and what needs to be done. What are the stakeholder expectations? We do it through responding to a lot of surveys and questions from investors and customers that are kind of very structured. And we look at all of this, we reflect it back, or we put it in the face of everyone in the company. But then the other side of it is that we bring everything that the company is doing in those related issues and we share it externally. So our role is to do reporting and disclosure and make sure that we understand what's important for us as a company, for our stakeholders and shareholders and customers. And we are responsible to understand what's important for them and make sure that we are able to act upon it. And then this means that we improve disclosure. We work with a lot of teams at Teva to create KPIs. ESG is measurable, and it will become even more so. I said at the beginning, non-financial performance. So we are expected to demonstrate performance over time, quantifiable. So it's becoming an area where you have to make sure that you walk the talk and that you actually have proof for everything that you say. So this world is really not greenwashing in any way. You can't just greenwash. You have to show proofs on certain areas that you do. And we are responsible to making sure that we have those internally and demonstrate them externally. In addition, we are also responsible for some of the health-related activities under the social pillar. And the main issue for Teva, for instance, is access to medicine. And what we are doing, we are helping drive programs that improve access to vulnerable groups or groups that have more difficulty getting access to our medicines.
Amazing. And so if we're looking now more broadly at companies and ESGs and then where we're headed, and you're talking about performance and measurability, that's something that feels weird to talk about. How do you measure an impact in a quantifiable way, in a way that if the same people that would be measuring your KPI or the number of users or your annual your burn rate or your ARR, how do you go about strategically quantifying impact?
Yeah. So actually for some, first of all, we're all learning, what we need to quantify and how to quantify it. And not everything is fully resolved. But I'll give you a few examples. For instance, if you look at the emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, those are quantifiable. There are methodologies under something that's called Science-Based Targets Initiative, SBTI. There is the Paris Agreement, and there is a pathway, whether it's 1.5 degrees, or well below 2 degrees in terms of global warming. And basically, there are some formulas and methodologies, and there is a way to calculate your emissions and to report on the reduction. So if you look at water and waste and packaging, there are ways in some of those areas to measure something. And I'm saying something because not all technologies, not all thresholds, not all areas are quantifiable, in the sense that there may be a way to quantify, but we don't really know what we need to quantify. There is no regulation. But there is more and more understanding what you need to quantify. If we talk about access to medicine, we're trying to define how many doses we provide through our programs, by how much we increase the number of doses that we provide. So because some of those areas are new, we can't always say what is good or what is bad, but we can demonstrate progress and change, which is quantifiable over time. And and when you make a commitment that you will improve by something, you can be judged whether you stand behind what you're saying. And we just recently, as Teva, we issued the largest ever sustainability linked bond. This bond is basically a financial instrument that you go to investors and you raise the money. So this is a bond that is linked to specific KPIs that are measurable, quantifiable. They have to be ambitious. They have to be linked to your existing ESG strategy. So we issued the largest ever of all industries up until today, bond of $5 billion. It's the first bond in our sector that has KPIs that are both for environment and access. Before us, there was a bond, not for so much money, but just for access. And it's the first generic bond. We're the first company in Israel that issued such a bond. So through this bond, you basically commit financially to quantifiable KPIs, and it's legally, it's filed in the SEC. You really connect a financial strategy with an ESG strategy.
Amalia, the work sounds incredible and it sounds so impactful and meaningful. Thank you very, very much for coming and sharing it with me. And I know that there's so many more things that I wanted to talk to you about, but 20 minutes is not nearly enough to cover the impact you're doing. So thank you very, very much nevertheless. And it was fantastic. And stay safe and stay healthy and continue making the world a better place, literally.
Thank you. I hope the world will be, and health to everyone these days.
Thank you.